So, what is fiction? Fiction is literature in the form of prose that describes imaginary events and people. Works of fiction are those that tell made up stories. So, fiction is defined by its focus on narratives invented by the author. So, if it's not real, it's fiction. Some examples are novels such as The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, novellas and novelette such as The Book of Written on the Beach, and short stories such as The Cask of Amontillado, which was authored by Edgar Allan Poe. So fiction writing is a narrative writing that involves elements of plot and character created entirely by the author as opposed to nonfiction, which is based on real-world events and real people. So this video will focus on the basic elements of fiction. Let's start with number one, character. So the characters are the fictional people in the story. It can include actual human beings, aliens, cyborgs, robots, monsters, animals, supernatural beings, and even inanimate objects that possess life and give life to the story. There's, for example, there's Anakin Skywalker, there's Sakuragi Hanamichi, there's Naruto, and there's Kaori, Arima, and Shobaki. There's the ramen guy in Naruto, and there's also Doraemon and Nobita. The Lord of the Rings, there's Frodo Baggins, there's Bilbo, there's Sam, there's Boromir, there's Denethor, there's Aragorn, and Gandalf. There's also Gimli and Gollum. There's also Merry, Pippin, and Sam. There's also Saruman. And there's a lot more I had not mentioned. So those names I told you are called characters. There's no story if there are no characters. The characters can be considered as the foundation for the entire work of fiction. With this, there are also different types of characters. Let me enumerate you the different types. There's the basic classification, major or main characters, and minor or side characters. There's also the classification if they are for or against. So there's a protagonist and antagonist. So there's also the classification in relation to character development throughout the story. There's a dynamic character, there's the static character, and there's also the round characters. So allow me to explain each of them. So a major character is the character that is central to the development and resolution of the story's conflict. A major character is the character that is central to the development and resolution of the story's conflict. So most actions happens around the character, and there can be multiple major characters. And the story happens around the major characters, and their activities usually advance the plot. These major characters are important figures at the center of the story. So he or she is usually called the protagonist, who is in conflict with the antagonist. So a protagonist is the character where the story revolves. In many instances, the protagonist is usually someone who has idealistic and outstanding traits and abilities. If the protagonist is the hero, the antagonist is the enemy. So the antagonist is the character who is opposed to the protagonist. That's why the protagonist and antagonist are in conflict. The minor characters are not as important as the major characters, but they still play a large part in the story. Their actions help drive the story forward. They impact decisions of the protagonist or antagonist, either by helping or interfering with the conflict. The one function of minor characters are to illuminate the protagonist. In many stories, the minor characters are static characters. Static means unchanging, which means that static characters remain the same throughout the story, from beginning to the end. On the other hand, dynamic characters show changes throughout the story. Basically, dynamic characters are defined as the characters who goes through some sort of change. Change can be its motivation, attitude, behavior, purpose, mentality, and physical characteristics. For example, in A Christmas Carol by Dickens, Ebenezer Scrooge started as a very stingy old man. and then change later on in the story after his experiences with the ghost. Also, there's the round character. So, a round character is a character that are fully developed figure in the story. They're complex and show a true depth of personality. Those are the basic information about characters. Next is plot. Plot relates to the series of events or actions that occur in the story. It is the story sequence of actions. In the most basic sense, a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's the most basic plot. So the typical plot usually starts with the exposition, which is the part that introduces the readers to the characters and setting. Exposition provides you the background information. After that, it leads to a series of complex and complications, which is called the rising action, until it reaches the climax. So, the climax is the turning point where the greatest conflict happens that will lead to the falling action until gradually going into the final outcome of the story, which is the resolution. Okay? And there are many different types of plot structures, aside from the traditional one which I just showed you. So I will now show you some of the common ones. Hero's Journey. It is inspired by Joseph Campbell's concept of the monomyth. It is a storytelling pattern that recurs in mythology all over the world. Joseph Campbell created it based from that. Next is the three-act structure. It is a model used in narrative fiction that divides a story into three acts, often called the setup, the confrontation, and the resolution. The next would be Dan Harmon's story circle, which is adapted from the hero's journey. So the story circle lays out a narrative arc that's commonly used by myths all over the world. As you can tell, the different plot structures have similarities. You can find out more about each of them as you research, and you can also find out other plot structures. So this video mainly introduces you to the concept. So the next element is the setting. Setting refers to the time and place of the story. It includes the following: time, when the story takes place. Is it during the ancient period or modern period? Or is it during the day, night, noon, midnight? It would be physical place. It is where the story takes place. You ask here, what's the weather, where's the location, and much more. Next would be social environment. When considering the period and location in real life, there's usually different cultural practices and beliefs. With that, the authors consider the cultural, sociological, political, religious, and other factors. For example, the setting of Harry Potter is in Hogwarts. There are multiple time elements during the day and during the night. So the place within Hogwarts also change. There are the rooms by different teachers. There's the hallway, there's the bathroom, there's the forest, and there's Hagrid's place, and more. Also, the setting of Hogwarts and the Muggle world is quite different. They have different culture, activities, and beliefs. Muggle world is filled with technology, while Hogwarts is more magical. As note, the setting can also help set the tone and mood of the story. Aside from that, it can also give emphasis to the traits of a character. Next is the point of view, or POV. It refers to how the story is told. It also refers as to who tells the story. Basically, point of view refers to the angle of narration, and it indicates who is the narrator and how is the narration done. In the video, three pictures show different POVs. In storytelling, there are three main POVs. This includes the first-person POV, second-person POV, and third-person POV. So in the first-person point of view, the narrator presents the perspective of one character's consciousness. It uses the pronoun I as the narrator, which is directly telling you the story from his or her perspective. So this excerpt from Skyward by Brandon Sanderson is an example of the first point of view. Only fools climb to the surface. It was stupid to put yourself in danger like that, my mother always said. Not only were there near constant debris showers from the rubble belt, but you never know when the krill would attack. Of course, my father traveled to the surface basically every day. He had to, as a pilot. I suppose by my mother's definition that made him extra foolish, but I always considered him extra brave. I was still surprised when one day, after years of listening to me beg, he finally agreed to take me up with him. Next would be the second person point of view. In the second POV, the pronoun used is you instead of I. So the narrative voice implies that the reader is either the protagonist or a character in the story and the events are happening to them. So this point of view is really hard to use and it feels weird as a reader. So in fiction, this POV is not commonly used, but it can be put to good use in non-fiction video games, advertising, and song lyrics. So this excerpt from The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern is an example of a second point of view. What kind of circus is only open at night? People ask. No one has a proper answer. Yet dusk approaches, there is a substantial crowd of spectators gathering inside the gates. You are amongst them, of course. Your curiosity gets the better of you, as curiosity is wont to do. You stand in the fading light, the scarf around your neck pulled up against the chilly evening breeze, waiting to see for yourself exactly what kind of circus only opens once the sun sets. The ticket booth, clearly visible behind the gates, is closed and barred. The tents are still, save for when they rip ever so slightly in the wind. The only movement within the circus is the clock that ticks by the passing minutes. If such a wonder of sculpture can even be called a clock. The circus looks abandoned and empty, but you think perhaps you can smell caramel wafting through the evening breeze. Beneath the crisp scent of the autumn leaves, a subtle sweetness at the edges of the cold. So next is the third point of view. In the third point of view, the narrator speaks like an observer. So the author is narrating a story about the characters, referring to them by name or using the third-person pronouns he, she, and they. And there are different types of third point of view. There's the omniscient third point of view, and there's the limited omniscient third point of view, and there's the objective third point of view. So the omniscient, so the narrator is like God. So he is like God. She or he is all-knowing and takes the reader inside the character's thoughts, feelings, and motives. In the limited omniscient, the narrator takes the reader inside one or at most very few characters, but neither the reader nor the character has access to the inner lives of any of the other characters in the story. In the objective third point of view, the narrator does not see into the mind of any character. Rather, he or she reports the actions and dialogue without telling the reader directly what the characters feel and think. In general, here's an example of the third point of view taken from The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. It was night again. The Wisdom Inn lay in silence, and it was a silence of three parts. The most obvious part was a hollow, echoing quiet, made by things that were lacking. If there had been a wind, it would have sighed through the trees, set the ensign creaking on its hooks, and brushed the silence down the road like trailing autumn leaves. If there had been a crowd, even a handful of men inside the inn, they would have filled the silence with conversation and laughter, the clatter and clamor one expects from a drinking house during the dark hours of night. If there had been music, but no, of course there was no music. In fact, there were none of these things, and so the silence remained. Inside the Wisdom, a pair of men huddled at one corner of the bar. They drank with quiet determination, avoiding serious discussions of troubling news. In doing this, they added a small solemn silence to the larger hollow one. It made an alloy of sorts, a counterpoint. The third silence was not an easy thing to notice. If you listened for an hour, you might begin to feel it in the wooden floor underfoot and in the rough, splintering barrels behind the bar. It was in the way of the black stone heart that held the head of a long dead fire. It was in the slow back and forth of a white linen cloth rubbing along the grain of the bar. And it was in the hands of the man who stood there polishing a stretch of mahogany that already gleamed in the lamplight. The man had true red hair red as flame, his eyes were dark and distant, and he moved with a subtle certainty that comes from knowing many things. The waystone was his, just as the third silence was his. This was appropriate, as it was the greatest silence of the three, wrapping the others inside itself. It was deep and wide as autumn's ending. It was heavy as a great river's smooth stone. It was the patient, cut-flower sound of a man who is waiting to die. So those are the different types of point of views. The next element is the theme. So we already discussed theme during the topic of poetry. So I will repeat to you the definition. So the theme is the central idea or meaning of the story. It is the message of the author. So it is rarely presented directly. So it is usually abstracted and implied. It provides a unifying point around which the plot, characters, setting, POV, the other elements of a story are organized. So the theme usually shows moral lessons, and it can also provide a dramatic premise and insights that the author wants to emphasize. So next would be conflict. Conflict is a struggle between two entities. So in the story, the main character or protagonist is usually in conflict with the antagonist or the main enemy. Without conflict, stories cannot progress interestingly. So this element makes the story more interesting. In literature, conflict is a literary device characterized by a struggle between two opposing forces. So conflict provides crucial tension in any story and is used to drive the narrative forward. So it is often used to reveal a deeper meaning in a narrative by highlighting characters' motivations, values, and weaknesses. So first, here are the two categories of conflict. The other types of conflict I will tell you later will belong into either of these two. So internal conflict and external conflict. The internal conflict is when a character struggles within their own opposing desires and beliefs. So it happens within the character and it drives the character's development. Meanwhile, external conflict sets a character against someone or something that is beyond their control. So external forces stand in the way of a character's motivation and it creates tension as the character tries to reach their goals. Here are the different types of conflict. So, man versus himself. And this is an internal conflict. So man versus himself is a battle between a person and his thoughts, feelings, and personal decisions. Second, man versus man. It is the battle between two individuals. Third, man versus nature. It is the battle between a person and natural calamities. It is a weather, wilderness, or natural disasters. Fourth, it is man versus supernatural. It is the battle between a person and a supernatural being. Either it is a god, ghosts, vampires, or monsters. Fifth is man versus society. It is the battle between a person and society. Society can be a group of people, the government, the cultural tradition, or the societal norm. So in this part, characters can be motivated to take action against society for survival. So strong sense of morality, or a desire for happiness, freedom, justice, or love are common motivations. The sixth is man versus technology. It is the battle between some kind of technology. So those are the conflict, and those are the six basic elements of fiction. There's the character, plot, setting, point of view, theme, and conflict.